नहीं फिर मेरा टाइम स्लॉट कोई नहीं पड़ने वाला है मेरे पे चिल्लाना चीखना होता है
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone.
मैथ प्लान एग्जाम्स आने वाले उसके यार
It's great to see you all. We're going to start in just a moment. In fact, I think we're going to get started right now. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming to this Pterodactyl guest talk. If you could all please, put yourselves on mute. That would be wonderful. Appreciate that. This is our Pterodactyl guest talk with Earthshot Prize winner and Kheyti founder Kaushik. And Kaushik, I'm sure I'm going to get your last name wrong, but Kappagantulu. It's great to see, awesome. It's great to see so many people here, familiar faces, people I met yesterday at the Manatee's lunch, and then so many others. Welcome to any of you who are coming from outside of our Pterodactyl community as well. It's exciting to meet you. So my name is Greg Findley. I'm director of Pterodactyl's 12-week flagship course, Climate Change Learning for Action. And our talk today is the keynote for the fellows in our newly launched Manatees cohort of Learning for Action. And it's also one of the expert guest talks for the fellows in our ongoing Lemurs cohort. These two cohorts together represent nearly 300 fellows from more than 30 countries, and they come from a broad range of professional backgrounds. I'll tell you a little about the course. The Learning for Action course is an intensive exploration of climate science, climate impacts, and climate solutions. And it's a combination of written classes and live weekly lab sessions, deep dives, and expert guest talks and workshops, all of which is intended to help fellows learn about climate change so they can find their role in working to address it. Pterodactyl was founded in 2020, and we have an ambitious goal of getting 100 million people working on climate change this decade. It's an ambitious goal because it's a huge problem, and it takes all of us working together to solve it. We offer a new cohort of Learning for Action starting every 6 weeks. Check it out if you're interested in getting involved in addressing climate change. Our next cohort begins on October 14th. Before we get started, I want to go over a few points about this Zoom session. We're going to have a presentation from Kaushik, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, but please mute yourself so we can all hear our speaker. Following the talk, we'll do the Q&A, but most of the questions will come from our current fellows using Slido. And fellows, you should have seen that Slido link in your Slack channel. If we have time, we'll get to some other questions in the chat function as well, but we are going to prioritize those questions from in Slido. And then, I'm incredibly excited that Kaushik is here to speak with us today. Kaushik has spent the last 15 years building scalable social enterprises, building rural livelihoods in India. He's the co-founder and CEO of Kheyti, an organization helping smallholder farmers battle climate change through its greenhouse in a box, a low-cost greenhouse bundled with end-to-end services that protects crops from environmental risks and grows 7 times more food using 90% less water. Along with Greenhouse, Kheyti offers farmers hands-on services, creating a seamless path towards doubling farmers' incomes. Before launching Kheyti, Kaushik spent 5 years as a leadership team member of Be Able, a social enterprise that connects school dropouts to mainstream careers through high-quality training and placement services. He was the first employee at Be Able and helped the company scale from its first training center to 200 centers across 14 states, training more than 50,000 school dropouts yearly. He's a graduate of IIT Kharagpur and has an MBA from Columbia Business School. Kaushik is a winner of the prestigious Earthshot Prize and the Elevate Prize. He's an Acumen India Fellow and a DRK Foundation entrepreneur. Wow, that's a lot there, Kaushik. Welcome. We're so pleased to have you here and can't wait to hear what you have to say. So take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I've been associated with Pterodactyl for a while. And even though I've done a few mentorship calls, I've been inspired by the community. So happy to do this more substantive sharing of our story. And hopefully some of it will be useful. And overall, the reason that I keep doing this, and I do this in a few other forums, but this forum in particular is just that all of you in this call inspire me immensely because when I started in this journey 15 years ago, and even in of social impact, and now almost 10 years ago in the area of climate and social impact, nobody was caring about these problems. And the only narrative you had was being sort of an outcast or someone trying to do something off the beaten path. And social entrepreneurship, more than anything else, I'll give you a a spoiler alert, is a lonely journey, and it only gets less lonelier when you meet other people who care about the problems that you do as much as you do. And I started off with me being the only person in my graduating class who cared about social impact, to now 160 people in this call, and I think you've mentioned 300 people, and I don't know how many people over the last few cohorts. So thank you for and making this world a less lonely place, and which is the only way we solve this problem. So I think I'll start with that. And today, I think I was thinking about what would be the most useful, and obviously this is guesswork. I don't know all the 160 of you, and so I'm guessing what would be useful. So I'll try to keep. We'll still try to make it as useful as possible by keeping as much time for Q&A as possible. But Greg insisted that I should be doing a presentation as well, which should be useful rather than only doing Q&A. So I'm going to be talking about obviously what we do at Kheyti, but we're maybe talk about three things, and hope that helps all of you as you figure out your journey and creating impact in the world of climate, but also in your journeys, in your careers as well. Where one is sort of my own journey of what brought me to this, and what made me start Kheyti, and what are the sort of things I learned along the way, and also what we do at Kheyti, and where we've reached over over the last few years of working on this. But then try to combine both of those at the end with saying, what are the lessons, the biggest lessons I've learned? There's many, but I'll try to condense into some of the lessons I think would be useful if I knew at the beginning of my social impact or climate impact journey. So I'll try to keep that short, and go through that, and then we will do questions, and happy to touch upon any topic that would be useful for this group. Right. So let me jump in. I have a slides here. I think am I sharing the right slides? 1 second. Great. Can you all see this? Okay, great. With this is the backdrop, let me sort of start at the beginning. So I am from Hyderabad, India. And by the way, in the chat, I saw somebody else write Hyderabad, India. So hello, whoever is that neighbor? I grew up in Hyderabad, in a typical Indian middle-class family, which meant that, when I was in school, the only thing I could be good at was math. If you're not good in math, you're, not part of the same, not part of the accepted cohort. So I made the mistake of being good at math, which meant that I was, I spent 4 years of my high school preparing to go to the best engineering college in India. And I did that, and then I reached there, and I also did all the right things that you're supposed to do, which is forget engineering and recruit for investment banking and consulting. So I did that as well. And as I was graduating college, I basically had a quarter life crisis. I was like, why am I doing any of the things that I'm doing in my life? Because I'm doing them because they were the right path, but not really my path. And that's where I said, okay, what is the one thing when it comes to work that I have any experience in my life that felt exciting? And the only time I could remember was that when I used to volunteer at a school for orphan kids near my house. And the reason I did that was because my dad pushed me to it, not because I really knew a lot of it, but that work really excited me. That's the only time that work excited me. I did apprenticeships, I did internships, all of that, but that's the work that excited me. And I asked myself why. And it was because when I was growing up, my grandmother raised me for most of the time. And she told me that if you work really hard, you will succeed. And that was true for me. I worked really hard and I succeeded, and I got the things that people told me to get. But for those kids I was working with, that wasn't true. It was, if they worked hard, they still needed so many other things, and they might not succeed at all. And my work of teaching them computer skills was changing that equation of hard work to success a little and making it a little bit more. So that's where I think I said, that's what I want to dedicate the rest of my life to. I want to make people's hard work pay off. and it's not true for most people in the world. So what can I do to do that? And I didn't know anything. I was a naive kid from college. So I said, hey, I started reading. I found this book called, a few books on social entrepreneurship, a book called How to Change the World, a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which is a very big book thing there back then. And I said, okay, it seems like there's models out there called social enterprise that could do all of this, that you could build a business and solve problems. I will probably change, solve all the problems that exist in, a couple of years. So let me just, work in this field for a couple of years. I'll start something on my own and we'll figure things out. And obviously that was not true. But I met a social entrepreneur during that time called Vijay Madan. And he was starting this enterprise that, Greg talked about, where they were helping school dropouts get access to jobs through training and placement services, which was very close to what I had done in my volunteer work. So I said, hey, why don't do that at scale? And I was the first employee. So I left home and I said, I'll do this for 6 months, fix this company, start something on my own. I ended up being there for 5 years. And that 5 years was my real education, was not college. It was not what I did in school. That 5 years was my real education, because I spent those 5 years traveling around across 14 states of India, in probably meeting about, a few thousand villages, hundreds of small towns, living in hundreds of small towns, and meeting thousands and thousands of people from rural India, and really got to understand the beauty of rural India, but also what it takes to really create impact and scale. Because it's easy to look at those problems at the macro level and feel either they're very easy because they are, you look at them as math, or that they are too big because the numbers are too big. So let me show you sort of a photo from that time. So these are the people who really educated me. So they're the kids on the right. It's a state in Northeast India called, Meghalaya, where we trained youth on computer skills and employment skills and got them jobs all across India. And on the left is, kids from the north part of India in the Himalayas, who we trained on more, automotive skills and got them jobs in sort of workshops and big manufacturers. This work, while the day-to-day was super fulfilling and it was the most education that I had gotten, my biggest challenge was that, I thought we were solving a symptom of a problem. That all these kids that were coming to us and working with us and we were getting them jobs were not coming to us because they were aspiring to go to cities and work in these jobs. It's because they were from agricultural families and agriculture was failing. And agriculture, is employs it's connected to 500 million people in India. And if that worked really well, I would say 90% of these kids wouldn't have come to us. They wouldn't have gone to a city and worked in a entry-level job. So I said, can I do something in agriculture? So I started exploring on that front. After that 5 years, I met some people who were working in agriculture, my co-founders, and we spent 6 months going all across India, meeting more than 1,000 farmers. We worked in fields. You can see a photo where we worked for a week in a farm. We worked, we talked to farmers. We talked on the phone with farmers. We tried to figure out what is the challenge that makes agriculture unviable in India, and that's causing all of these challenges of rural poverty to happen. And one of those farmers that I met during that time was Reshma. So this is Reshma. Reshma is this force of nature. Every time I met her, she had this energy, enthusiasm, and a smile on her face. So this is a photo of her that I took. She, while being an adult, without any kind of inhibition, she wanted to better herself. She joined on the side a Sunday school to make sure that she became literate and she could understand agricultural techniques. Reshma worked on a farm of about 2.5 acres for the last 15 years, and was growing different kinds of crops, and was someone who wanted to really increase her income by learning new techniques, by learning to read, write, by seeing YouTube videos. The most progressive, smallholder farmer you could think of. But Reshma's reality was not really what her enthusiasm, showed, right? The year that we met her, she told me that, one unseasonal rain wiped out one of her crops. The year before that, she had a pest attack, and and pesticides weren't working because there was overuse of pesticides, which had wiped out maybe 3/4 of her crop. For 6 months in a year, she was not doing anything on her farm because of excess heat, which she said was getting worse every year. And it wasn't just Reshma's problem. All of those 1,000 farmers we met with, without knowing the word, that time, the word climate change did not exist in any of the vocabulary of any of those farmers, but they talked about climate change. They talked about, every single farmer talked about how the summer is earlier, so they couldn't harvest on time, or the rains either are delayed or are unseasonal, which means that, your crops get damaged. And they were talking about depleting groundwater. They were talking about increased pest attacks, all things that they did not have control. So they worked hard all year long. Reshma worked hard all year long, but had no control over her incomes because of external risks. And me being, because of my mantra being that hard work needs to pay off. And every single of these farmers that we met basically said that their hard work does not pay off. I said, this is what I need to dedicate my life to. And that's how Kheyti was started, right? And just, you guys, I'm sure in this group know the stats a lot, but in India, just 7 billion. It's not every single farmer faces this, and this is stats from many years ago. We use $7 billion on pest attacks. There's 10% yield reduction in many areas through studies due to excess heat. There's 60% drop in groundwater. There's unseasonal rain. When I say bad rain, unseasonal rains wipe out crops every year, and this is happening, by the way, as we speak today. That Telangana, the state I live in, has had unseasonal rain and floods for 2 days when it shouldn't be raining, and there's going to be a huge amount of crop loss that happens there, right? But agriculture also, what we found out, plays another unique role, which is the opposite of all this. It's super vulnerable, obviously, to climate change and the effects of weather, but it's also a big contributor to many of the challenges that happen, in environmental degradation. I think there's studies which saw 20%, 30%, 34% emissions from agriculture of overall irrigation. Fresh water is a big challenge we've known for a long time. 70% of freshwater withdrawals go to agriculture. Pesticide application has challenges. Fertilizer has challenges. Sure, there's solutions to this, but those are not scaling up enough, or there are many challenges that exist, right? So after talking to these 1,000-odd farmers and Reshma, we said, okay, how do we solve this problem? We said, let's look at everything that exists across the world. We looked at every single sustainable agriculture solution that existed across the world and technologies that existed across the world. And we said, hey, there actually exist so many different solutions, but they aren't accessible to smallholder farms. And that's the work that we should embark on. So me and my co-founders, that's what Kheyti does. Is in one sense is that how do we democratize access to climate smart practices, which is both sustainable and high yielding and climate resilient practices to smallholder farms. And the first thing we've embarked on is what we call the greenhouse in a box, which is basically a low cost greenhouse bundled with services, which double farmers' incomes, which protect those incomes from climate risks like heat, rain, pests, and hail, and make agriculture more sustainable. So you use 1/50th the land so that you do, and to disincentivize deforestation, 1/50th the water, and much lesser fertilizer and pesticide. And, greenhouses are, not really new, right? And let me talk about, a little bit about what we did differently, but just what we did was greenhouses just aren't accessible to smallholder farmers because of two things. First is cost. So that's the first thing we worked on. We said, how do we create the lowest cost greenhouse available to a smallholder farmer? And over many years and continuous iteration and a design process that involved more than 5,000 farmers who gave inputs, we brought down the cost of greenhouses by 80% from our first version, but 90% when compared to traditional cultivation. But the second challenge is that even if you made a greenhouse super low cost in nature, smallholder farmers can't access them because they lack the right kind of support that exists, that is needed to adopt the technology. So that's what we do. We combine that low-cost greenhouse with end-to-end services, which are in everything from installation, education, seeds, inputs, and tech-backed advisory to make sure that farmers can adopt this technology in the right way. And what this does is, I talked about where we started out, is that agriculture has this multi-pronged problem, which is agriculture has short income problems, that these farmers don't have enough incomes. They have climate risk today, and their farming is still unsustainable. So, but how do we find a solution that encourages all three things is what we had embarked on. And that is what we figured out, is that a greenhouse gives short-term income increases to smallholder farmers, It helps them protect their incomes from short-term challenges of climate, but also encourages movements towards sustainable practices, which is good for the planet. So what's something that's good for farmers and the planet is the solution that we were looking for. And there's, and most of the farmers we work with are smallholder farmers who own 1 acre, less than 1 acre of land, who directly every day double their incomes double their incomes, and also save millions of liters of water over the lifetime of their greenhouse. And this is Reshma, by the way. She was the first user of our greenhouse. So using this solution, she doubled her incomes. She used that incomes to invest in healthcare, in her family's education. She completed that Sunday school, and she's now continues to be a force of nature, someone who's super happy, super enterprising, but that hard work finally pays off and converts into something fruitful because of a solution like this. And because I'm the only solution, she started working on other techniques as well in her greenhouse. But so most of the stuff that she's done is from her perspective. But what our work was, what is the intervention that we gave her to convert that enterprising nature into something that's climate smart and fruitful? What is the reason that Kheyti exists? And it isn't just Reshma's story today. When we started out, it was 1 farmer, then it became 10. And there's farmers like Shabnam Topno now in Jharkhand, which is a tribal state in India, who's not only doubled or tripled their income, but used it to buy a second greenhouse and encouraged tribal women farmers to use technologies like this who never even thought about technologies. There's farmers like Ampi Devi, who's also from Jharkhand, who takes care of her entire family because her husband works as a daily wage laborer and always had challenges with heavy rains, with heat, and with different kinds of climate activities. And now she just works 1-2 hours a day in her greenhouse and has made about $1,000 of income compared to $250 of income that she used to make a year, and invested in her children's education. So these are the hard works that we want to convert to success that we stand for. Today, we work with 6,000 farmers across multiple states of India. But it's the first step of our journey. We want to reach 1 million farmers by 2033. But I think after about a few years of R&D, over the last couple of years, we've gone into the scale stage. So out of the 6,000 farmers, 18 of those, so 90% of those farmers came in the last 18 months. And we've after a lot of hard work, we've all been happy to be recognized by different forums, which includes the Earthshot Prize, which is the the environmental prize given by the Prince William in last year. And then we're part of, there's a TED and Forbes study and many other things, right? But I think this is the story of Kheyti, which is important, and this, and connecting it to the story of how I started Kheyti. But what I wanted to share as we end this is as all of you think about making an impact in social, either in climate and social, the intersection of that as well, is not the story of the last 15 years was not so straightforward. And it is not this rosy picture that, hey, we've created this amazing innovation and we've gotten these awards and we solved everything. But it was significantly bumpy, I would say. So I'll try to say some of the things that I wish I had known. The first is what I talked about in the beginning, is that the education that I said I'd received, right? It is not in college, and I'm glad that there's programs like Terra.do, which help you get much more contextual knowledge. But the only way I feel that one can figure out how to solve a problem is what I call apprentice with the problem. And this is a phrase, and a lot of these phrases are things that I've stolen. So first, there's a book called How to Change the World by David Bornstein, which is where I read this for the first time. Is a lot of that, in many of the vocational trades, especially the vocational training where I worked in for many years, there's this concept of apprenticeship where you work with the master, master skillsman, and you get the skills that you need. But one of the things we don't do enough is apprentice with the problem we want to solve without thinking about the solution. Spend enough time in understanding the problem before understanding the solutions, because that's where the right solutions come from. For Kheyti, that meant me spending those 5 years understanding rural India, and the 1 year spending understanding those 1,000 farmers. And that all was brutal and drag breaking, and was not lucrative and I had to let go of my career and compensation, all of that. But without that, I don't think I would have gotten education, which is really focusing on, I need to solve this problem. I don't care about the solution. Let me just understand the problem as much as possible. So I say that's sort of number one thought from me when I think about it. The second is that none of these solutions we can achieve alone. And there's a slide that I hid, and I don't know if I have it next, but I'll show it to you if it exists. But none of the stuff that we did alone. When we started out, we were not greenhouse manufacturers or designers. So we went everywhere that people know about greenhouses all across India. We went to Israel, we went to Stanford, we went to everywhere that people know design to say, can you help us figure this out? When we said, let's go to farmers, we said, we can't reach farmers ourselves. We work with other NGOs who help us reach farmers. We work with businesses which help us not only reach farmers, but also build a dealer network and a commercial network to connect with farmers. We work with now government because when there's 100 million farmers in India, most of them are served by the government rather than businesses. So without the government, there's no scale. So one is remembering that none of these problems can be solved alone, but collaborations are tough, but you need to make that happen to solve these problems at scale is the second, I think, again, tough learning that I've had, because when I started out, I think I used to feel that I could solve all of these problems myself, and I fell flat on my face many times and failed maybe 20, 30 times before I realized one of the solutions is go to people who are smarter than you, who have more experience than you to solve this problem. The third is that these problems are hard. And this is, again, something I stole from one of my mentors, Vijay Majan, is that any problem that had a single variable maximization has been solved in the 20th century. So even with something like climate smart agriculture, one of the things we don't talk about enough is, hey, sustainable agriculture can solve this problem. A smallholder farmer like Reshma, who's earning about 30,000 rupees a year, might care internally about sustainability, but is not going to make any other choices other than putting food on the table for the next year. How to increase that income is the focus. So if you say, hey, sustainable agriculture is good for you in the long term, you will not be able to solve that problem unless you also solve the income problem. And then you also solve the short-term climate risk problem. Any problem we touch in the world of climate has those externalities. And if you don't think about them together, no solution is going to work. And that's another reason why, all of these come from things that we had failures on. We said, first, let's just focus on increasing farmers' income. Then we realized that soil health is going down. Let's just focus on solving soil health. As soon as you start doing that, farmers revert back to normal programs because they don't make enough money. So, and we do both of that, and there is one unseasonal rain and farmers are not interested in you anymore. So you have to focus on solving those multiple variable problems together. The fourth is that this also I learned the hard way, that especially when you grow up and you're told, hey, you're very intelligent, and what you focus on most of the times is to be interesting. How do I come up with this cool idea? How do I come up with, I focus a lot on how do I come up with the innovation? But what I realized is innovations fail as soon as they hit the ground, unless you're focused more on being interested in the people that you're serving and in the problem that you're serving than being interested. So for us, that looked like, and I was lucky that my co-founders were much more aligned with this than me, because they pushed me to say, let's talk to 1,000 farmers before we even think about the solution. Even when you have the solution, let's involve another 1,000 farmers in the design process to reduce the cost, because just engineering alone won't solve this problem. So I think unless we focus on putting the customer, the problem at the center, and rather than the solution and the idea and the innovation, I don't think these problems can be solved. And the final one is, what I titled this talk is that this is all about changing narratives rather than anything else, because every single of the big problems that we talk about in climate, or in the intersecting sector of poverty alleviation, are entrenched. Greenhouses are not new. They've been around for centuries, literally centuries, not decades, centuries. They've been around commercially for decades. And there is no reason, and that Kheyti is not a science company, an engineering company. I'm not someone who's innovated something completely new. The only difference was that we said, that that everybody thought that these technologies don't work for smallholder farmers because smallholder farmers are poor, they are beneficiaries, they need charity, they won't work with technology. And just when you believe that you can change the narrative, that's when the narrative gets changed. So first it starts with saying, I have to change the narrative. And that's when this gets changed. So that if I leave with you these 5 points, but the one point is that to ask yourself in the problem, in this subsection of the problem that you feel passionate about within climate, when you think about solving that problem, ask yourself the question, I think that at least across all these areas is how you can apprentice with the problem as much as possible so that you can understand it internally, how you can lean on people who are smarter than you to build this. Are you thinking about the multiple variables that are, that you need to solve for to solve the problem? And are you more interested in, being interested than being interesting? And more importantly, what is the narrative that everybody believes that you want to change, that you will commit to, so that, because that's how over time the narrative gets changed. So those are the learnings I've had, and this is the story of Kheyti, but happy to answer any questions you have. And hopefully some of this journey that we've had is useful to you and is something that you can use in your own climate journey. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Kaushik. Incredible story, and I'm so glad you shared that. We've got all sorts of questions and comments in the chat. Fellows, we only have a couple of questions in Slido so far, so please go ahead and put your questions in there, and we will get to those. But yeah, the last comment I want to share, I don't know if you saw it, Kaushik, but so much humility embedded in these points, business model and decision making, and I would just have to agree 100% with that. Really, really cool to see. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump to the first question that came in, which was from Shannon, and it says, how do you handle reluctance, hesitancy from those you seek to support? And what has been the most challenging element of your work? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll answer this maybe one slightly repetitive and one more tactical way. I think the repetitive way is the only way you solve that is by being interested into understanding why the reluctance and the block exists. And behavior change only happens when you understand motivators and barriers, and then they become not reluctance, but very practical reluctance. And for example, for many of the farmers who we work with, who earn, let's say, 30,000 rupees, 40,000 rupees a year, an investment in a greenhouse is a significant, significant sort of risk taking, and human beings are risk seeking towards avoiding losses, and they are risk averse towards making gains. So you know that as human beings. And these farmers have gone through multiple layers of having challenges where people have come to them and told them, hey, this thing will work, and it won't. So it's a very practical thing about trust. So I would say the answer to that question is, we said, how do we build trust? First is staying with the community, understanding it, building it ourselves. Second is demonstrating. So doing something, taking the risk yourself and demonstrating that it works. And the third, more importantly, is connecting back to the piece of the V above I, is that realizing that there is many NGOs, organizations that have built that trust over many years, 10 decades, and leaning on them and giving away the credit to them as required. So we work with partners where the farmers just know us through those partners because the partners have built the trust. We are a technology provider, and the impact still happens. So I think those are the three ways that we look at it: is partnerships, demonstration, and actually basically embedding ourselves within community.
Thanks, Kaushik. Questions are starting to roll in now, so I've got a bunch here. Sue Wei asked, in agriculture, what's your thought, advice in addressing the issue where farmers, such as coffee, are not compensated adequately for their crops that they sell?
I think that it's one of those complex problems, multivariable optimization problems, right? I think that we are seeing an overall trend of sort of the supply chains getting more democratized and fair. But I think that the complex problem comes from incentives, and I mean, coffee especially is one which is much complex and incentive. But instead of talking about a specific answer, I would say the answer is the places I've seen that fully breaking is first changing the narrative of saying that farmers are not just the producers at the last mile, but they are an integral part of the supply chain, looking at them as suppliers rather than as poor farmers. I think is an important piece. And second is then enabling those farmers to actually act like suppliers, where they can and they can have more part of the supply chain. And the third is technology. I think technology is a huge role to play in democratizing those supply chains. So while we are not the people focusing on that, many of my friends focus on that whole piece of increasing fair compensation to farmers in the supply chain. And there's been some breakthroughs, and I am optimistic that in the next 10 years, some of those supply chains, especially the big ones like coffee, will be disrupted, and there will be more fairness in there.
Thanks. Yeah, a couple of questions that are pretty similar. So JJ asked, any thoughts on making this work in North America? We don't have many small farmers here. I'm wondering about a suburban agriculture version. And then Nina said, are you thinking of expanding to other countries after India? If yes, what countries would be interesting for Kheyti?
Yeah, I mean, so I recently found out that a small farm in the US is 300 acres. And just for the people who are not from the US, a small farm in India is an average is 2 acres, but it's an order of magnitude different. So for us, I don't think we have many 300-acre farmers in India. But so I'm not the expert to talk about that context. But the answer to both of those questions is yes. But I think connects to the fact that what we're looking for is always the right partners who can help us understand that. Because again, what we don't want to lead with is that arrogance that we understand this everywhere. Even in India, sometimes state to state, the learning that is needed of the problem and the community is so different that you lean on partners. I think we're more confident about, because we know people who work in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, where I think over time we'll definitely partner and try to scale this up. I'm less familiar with North America. I'm sure there'll be a solution there, and people much more experienced than us will figure that out.
Great. There've been a couple of questions about just practicalities. How does watering work in these greenhouse in a box? And then are there impacts on biodiversity, bees, and other pollinators?
Yeah. So I think two things. First is these greenhouses are equipped with drip irrigation. So which is basically a way of, if people are not familiar with agriculture, is a way of giving small amounts of water at the roots of the plant rather than the sort of flooding the field. And combined with the fact that these greenhouses are basically, let me just describe what these are. I know you've seen a photograph, but what we talk about greenhouses is slightly different from the North American greenhouses. These are steel structures covered by covering materials, which is this insect netting on all sides, which cuts off pests. There's shade netting on the top, which reduces temperature in the summer. And there is rain protection inside to protect from unseasonal rains. I think those are the three main protections we have. The drip irrigation combined with the shade netting means that evaporation loss reduces, and that's why you have 90% lesser water consumption when compared to traditional cultivation. And so these are small units, so they don't affect bees and pollinators in the rest of the field outside. So these are 1/16 an acre. And second is the other thing that causes challenge with bees and pollinators is pesticide use. So the pesticide use is cut off by 90 to 100%, depending on the farmer using the right. So you overall make it better for the bees and pollinators. If you want to bring in bees and pollinators, we also have you can raise the sides of the greenhouse. So you can open the sides up in the day so that pollinators can come in and leave, even though farmers don't use it a lot, because in that small plot of land, they use self-pollinating seeds.
Awesome. Nick asked the question, is there any consideration for connecting the Kheyti farmers through some sort of network to share their experience and education and learnings?
Funny to ask, one of the projects the team is working on is using a partner, again, rather than us building it from scratch, is like a Facebook for farmers. So the farmers that we work with, so sort of an internal platform where farmers can talk to each other, because again, they know more than us. Because when we were very small, our R&D farms used to be the best in class for how do you grow in a greenhouse. Now I think our R&D farms are far behind, because there's farmers who get 5 times the yield of our R&D farms because they just figured out how to do it in their farm. So we're trying to figure out how do we reduce the work of our extension staff, because there are expert farmers who can know more, by setting up a sort of a tech platform over WhatsApp and an app so that farmers can talk to each other.
There's another question here. Naresh from Hyderabad says 70% of farmers in India are rain-fed. How does your solution relate to them if they don't have a groundwater source in the first place all year round?
Right, it's a good point, and we don't right now. I think that this is sort of a learning as well for the overall journey. Is that you can what we realized we wanted to solve the full problem all the time, but what we realized that there's levels of the problem, and and you can't. What our solution works for really is for the farmers who solve the subsistence farmer problem. Subsistence farmer problems include lack of access to water, lack of access to electricity, lack of access to inputs, markets, things like that. So I think those interventions need real charity-based and NGO-based interventions. We are trying to build a sort of a scalable, ideally market-based over time, even though today it is not, over time model. And I think this suits farmers there. But the piece is that there are many organizations who we work with who are working on the 70% and getting them to the place that we can work with them. So that's the idea of the long-term goal, is work with the organizations which will solve that problem so that you can solve the next level problem.
Great. Sue asked, could you give some examples of the technologies and the companies used or working on democratizing the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to. I'll be biased towards my friends. So I think on the coffee side, there's a very large nonprofit that works in a market-based model called Root Capital. That's working in multiple countries across the world, which is trying to simplify that. On the general supply chain at large side, one of my friends is running an organization called Open Supply Hub. They're more early. Root Capital is much further, but where they're trying to make the supply chain transparent and now including agriculture, so that there's the incentives around there. In agriculture in India, there's a few organizations that that are in the agri-tech space. I don't think they're coming in from a purely philanthropic angle, but they're the focus that they're doing is that how do we use tech to aggregate farmers and simplify the supply chains. There's a very big organization called Dihat. There's a another organization called Ninja. There are some that are working on specific supply chains, like on bananas, like Sahyadri farms. So it's a very big and growing industry. And I'm happy to share more offline if needed. But if you Google, who's working on the market linkage side, I think in the last 5 years, I would think that there's at least 200 organizations that have come up in this sector.
Awesome. We got a couple of questions, again, practical about the greenhouses themselves. How resistant are they to wild animals? Are there problems with deer or boars? And then another one, what is the life of these greenhouses? How often will they need to be replaced, rebuilt?
Yeah. So they are, most recently somebody asked me if they were resistant to elephants, and I said no, because this is an organization that works in human-wildlife conflict, and they want to help farmers who conflict with elephants not do that. And definitely not elephants, but definitely boars, deer, goats, livestock. And most interestingly, one of our farmers sent us a video of monkeys, which cause a lot of damage in crops just for fun, and monkeys playing on the top of the greenhouse, I think, and not being able to go inside. So, and I think the second part is today, I think the greenhouse works, the life of the greenhouse is 15 years, and the covering materials needs to be replaced about 7 to 8 years. We have not had any greenhouses in the last 10 years that needed to be replaced. But one of the things we are worried about is, even though there's a net offset, net sustainability, but what do we do at the end of life? So one of the R&D projects we're working on is what's the sort of recycling models that we can work on. I don't think we'll have a solution now, but hopefully in the next couple of years.
Fantastic. There've been a few questions about who paid for your discovery period? How did you get going? And then a second one, who, if any, in the finance investment sector in India is backing things like Kheyti and putting money into this?
Yeah. Interesting question. So not a lot of backing available in discovery phases. Let me just say that you have to make sacrifices. I think my 5 years in the social, I would say it's much better right now in the sense that my 5 years in working in the first startup that I worked on, I had to take a 90% pay cut, and the 1 year that was that we did discovery. At that point of time, again, there was not a lot of opportunities available. So I call it impact investing, like to call themselves patient capital. I said I moved back to Hyderabad primarily because there's something called parent capital, which is give me a roof and some food. I think so. I'm very grateful to my parents for giving me a year of food and shelter so that I could do that. But I didn't have any other income. But I also think that right now, again, connecting into what we're talking about, 9 years after that, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, of fellowships and stipends and these exploratory programs that I think give you some more of a kick-off starting point, like and even in organizations, like this more of the sort of the learning on the job model. Like in Kheyti, we ran this program called the Kheyti Fellow Program, where we said, hey, over a couple of years, we'll pay you like not market salary, but slightly less than that, and you can learn, you can contribute to Kheyti and learn a lot by being on the ground. So I see a lot of my friends in this sector also doing that. So I think there's a lot more avenues to work on the job, and learn on the job right now compared to before. And I think there was a second question. Sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah, I don't remember either. I've been reading all these other. I have not seen this many questions come in ever before. You've sparked a lot of questions. This is really cool to see. And I'm trying to sort through them all and try to stay up on that. We can come back to it. But it was about the finance. Yeah, I think you mentioned it, or any bun investing in this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's the positives and the negatives. The positives is that climate tech investments I mean, in India, I think is an all-time high. So many new funds open, so many new incubators, accelerators open, all of that. And I'm sure in the Terra network, you can find a lot of those things as well. I think the challenge is that they still are, there's a missing middle and a missing gap for underserved markets like smallholder farmers, and which requires sometimes a blended like philanthropy and more patient capital and combination of philanthropy and capital. I think there's still a gap there in India, but internationally there's a lot more. So a lot of our funding so far has come from international foundations who believe in this idea of venture philanthropy, which is that we need to put philanthropy patiently to build a business model which can then be ready for mainstream capital. But that concept is starting in India, but not really scaling up more. But I think in the US, I mean, when I say globally, it's the US has a lot more of that, compared to India.
Great. Another question that's come up is, do you offer financial aid for farmers who might not be able to afford this up front? And then a second question, somewhat related, is what were the technological changes that allowed the costs of the greenhouse themselves to come down so much? And how did you figure that out?
Yeah. The first one, I think, yes. So we've affordability, even after bringing 90% cost down, remains the challenge. So we use a combination of we sell these to farmers who can afford it. We have special programs from philanthropy and CSR to subsidize some of this. We are now working with government to subsidize some of this. We work on financing. We've worked on financing in the past where we get loans to farmers. We are experimenting right now with a leasing model, everything under the sun to make affordability easier. And once we crack that at scale, that's when we'll reach 1 million farmers, which is our 2033 goal. So I think that remains the main challenge to solve for the 1 million farmers. And in the second question was technological changes. I think that the zoom out level, it comes back to human-centered design, is that nobody had built a greenhouse for the Indian smallholder farmer before. And every version we said, okay, what's the Indian smallholder farmer and the Indian crops require? And we took what was already there, which was basically models that came in from Israel, from the US, and then said, okay, what do we cut down? And so few of the examples would be, we figured out that in India, what we need to focus on is the heat, not the cold. So you don't need as much height as you need. So you can reduce the material steel requirement. Then we realized that if you do a smaller greenhouse, you can make it much stronger for wind without a lot of foundation elements. So we redesigned the foundation to say it doesn't need as much concrete, it doesn't need as much steel, it can be much more simpler. We said, how do we make the installation DIY or DI do it easily rather than compared to something that is a full, very sophisticated one. So we reduce the installation time by half. So it's a combination of probably 12 to 13 different incremental innovations rather than it being one big breakthrough that we had alternative amazing materials that we did that, right? I think that is the journey. So it took us 8 versions to get to this place.
Really exciting and cool to hear about. Several people have asked, what kind of challenges are there in moving away from chemical inputs to organic agricultural practices?
I think that from again, my perspective, the smallholder farmer perspective, I think the main challenge is short-term income. So, and I think all the studies show that, yes, you can, longer term, you can have lesser costs, same level of yields, and with the right kind of, soil health over time. But it remains a short-term income loss. More importantly, if you're growing high value crops like vegetables, and that difference is much more stark. And how do you deal with that is the main barrier. There's a behavior change barrier of saying farmers want their soil to be good. So the biggest program in the world, which recently got, in terms of number of farmers of regenerative agriculture, which got a huge award right now, it's called the AP Natural Farming, which is next door to our house, which is the Andhra Pradesh is a state which converted so many farmers to natural farming. Great, or regenerative agriculture is amazing program, and farmers have done the behavior change, but most farmers only do a plot of their land rather than their whole land, because they still want to make money, short-term incomes in the rest of the land. So if you can solve both of those problems, while also, especially in the era of extreme weather, because once you move to organic inputs, your short-term yields are going to drop, and if you have a bad rain, you're like, what did I do right now? Let me just go back to chemical cultivation and make a lot of money in one season and go back. If you don't solve those 3 problems together, we will not move farmers towards sustainable agriculture.
There's a couple of people have asked, are there any considerations for extension into vertical farming?
Yeah, I mean, at the core, one of our core competencies is this farmer-centric R&D, right? So there's always a list of things that our team is doing. So I hope we do that, but I think for us right now, the biggest barrier there is how do we make it affordable enough for smallholder farmer context. Right now, still maybe we have in our product roadmap, we always have short-term, you have some medium terms, and you have some long-term goals. And I would say, vertical farming is a long-term goal. One of the interesting, maybe just segues I would add is we are trying right now with a solar company is a solar powered greenhouse which has solar panels at the top, which also reduces the heat in the summer, but also generates electricity. That I'm excited about. That's a medium-term thing, but I'm excited about trying that.
Okay. A question about, can you say a little bit more about how you built community and trust when you came to these farmers as a group of outsiders?
Yeah, I mean, for me individually at a very individual level, and I'll talk about what is this right now because it's not scalable. I think when we started out, it was just, it's just admitting that you don't know anything. And also second is real immersion. And the immersion means, and I thought we did it well, but we did it by saying, hey, let's work on a farm together. Hey, let's shadow the farmer together. And then I realized there's even better ways to do it. One of our friends who runs a behavior consulting company, they do it really well. They go and live in a village for a week and basically do everything that the farmers do. And the idea what that helps is, and not from a, hey, like I heard this word called poverty tourism perspective, but from a real, I am a peer that I'm going to live the same life as you, from a genuine interested feeling. And that completely breaks down. It's probably the second or third day where it breaks down. If you have one conversation, there's always going to be a barrier. If you share a meal together, if you really immerse yourself, I think that's where it breaks. That's not scalable though. That's why we depend on partners who've done that over decades, 20, 30 years right now, to really build the community trust rather than saying, we will go and immerse ourselves in all of these communities.
There's a question about your early discover human-centered design process. Could you tell us a little bit more what that looked like? Was it interviews with subsets of multiple farmers? And what advice would you have for others interested in doing more of that, the human-centered design?
Yeah, I mean, there's a standardized process, but it's a lot of the things that I talked about, which is that I combine human-centered design a little bit with lean startup, which is, again, a idea of development methodology, has a lot of parallels. Start with a hypothesis, immerse, through interviews, through immersions, through shadowing, to test that hypothesis. Then come and make a second hypothesis and iterate that hypothesis till you feel like we can make a prototype or an MVP, as they call it in lean startup, minimum viable product. Make that MVP, go back and do the same things and iterate it a few times. And then if you feel confident, then you start doing more of it. So how do you do the minimum possible? And the first minimum possible is just listening. Second minimum possible is proposing something and seeing what the reaction is. The next level is selling something and figuring out what the reaction is. So I think that's the process. So the biggest recommendation is just beginner's mindset. Do not start with, this is my idea. Start with the listening. I think that, because my temptation always is, hey, how about a greenhouse? No, you can't say greenhouse. You have to be like, first listen. Then how about a thing that could solve this problem? I think that you need to be as beginner's mindset as possible. And whatever you have a bias towards, you need to throw it out the window.
Great. There's a follow-up on that. What was your first hypothesis, and then how has that changed over time?
I mean, the first set we didn't have hypothesis of just listening about trying to wait. And the first hypothesis we went with was, I guess, actually, maybe I'll talk about a few of the ideas that we went and tested out. Everything from, I think we did, hey, that farmers basically need access to water. So can we figure out, I think we did, we looked at bore well. How do we figure out where water exists? I think we tried that as well, because water was the main problem that people were talking about. I think we went for a model where we said, let's do millets, at scale, growing millets. Would that be a model? I think things that are so different from greenhouses also were part of the equation. But the reason all those experiments came in was that we started the hypothesis saying farmers basically just want to increase their incomes. Farmers want to protect themselves from extreme water. They mainly from depleting groundwater. So I think when we iterated that, then you went back and figured out, okay, this thing doesn't work. And then you go back to the drawing board. And this was the one that had the least number of blocks as we went along. And even today, I think there's still a hypothesis. I mean, you're still testing out hypothesis 9 years from now, 9 years after starting.
That's great. We're almost to the hour, so if it's okay, I'm going to ask you one final question here. This one's gotten a few people have asked. And it says, it sounds like Kheyti has amazing partners. What was the discovery process like for these partners? And what are the main lessons in qualifying partners to work with?
Yeah, I think the second question is important, which is, I would say that, I would say, I wouldn't just say values. I would say that for some value alignment, not, and more importantly, sort of, even if you're working with NGOs, business line, which is that your incentive, your first is, you can't match on all of your values, but there's something fundamental that you align on, because of which you can collaborate together. The second is your day-to-day should align in a way. If you have to change the day-to-day, it's the partnership will change, will break. Their day-to-day and your day-to-day should be somewhere, there should be a connection between that. And then I think the discovery process was, figuring out who is smarter than us and everything that we wanted to do, and say who's done this aspect of our work better. And I think the third part I would add is being generous with credit. I mean, most of our partner locations, we said it's done by them, and it is done by them. I think a lot of the organizations struggle with, okay, whose brand will be there on the table? But if you're looking at the impact and the solution at scale, you don't care about those things. So I think those are the three things that help us, I think, in partnerships.
Kaushik, thank you so much for this incredible session, and even more for the incredible work that you do. This has been really enlightening. So many people have had questions and great comments, and really, thank you so very much. And for everyone here, thank you as well. We are at time, so I want to respect everyone's time. So thank you for attending. Thank you for your amazing questions. Apologies if I didn't get to your question. As I said, I've never seen so many questions come in on one of these talks, and all interesting. And yeah, so many comments saying, Kaushik, thank you. It's so inspiring, and people are just excited to get to work. So thanks all.
Yeah, thank you so much. As I said in the beginning, I'm more inspired than, when I see so many people excited about this cause. So thank you for making this a less lonely journey. And this is how we solve all of these problems.
All right.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.